Ironheart needs a spectacular new suit for Phase 5, and there's some fantastic upgrades she could make that would make her suit rival even Iron Man's armor. What are the best new additions that we could see in Ironheart's future? Let's discuss. At the end of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, Riri has to leave her suit behind in Wakanda for two very important reasons. The first is because Vibranium is now at the top of the world's must-have list, so sending Riri back to the United States with a pure Vibranium suit is seen as a little dangerous. Of course, the other reason why Riri needs to give her suit back is so that she has time to design and create her own in her Phase 5 series. What fun would it be if the suit is already made and considered perfect? How will Disney sell Ironheart merchandise if they don't upgrade the suit with every new appearance? The same thing happens with every superhero, especially the suit wearers like Iron Man and Ironheart. But although the circumstances are unfortunate in that Riri doesn't have a suit anymore, it gives her a chance to build something even better. There's a ton of fancy suit upgrades that she could incorporate to make the Ironheart suit one of the best in the MCU, and the first one I want to talk about is a new AI system. All suits like this tend to have an AI program that helps keep everything in order. It's hard to keep a suit like this functioning, okay? And I'm sure the AI that everyone would want to see piloting the Ironheart suit is the downloaded consciousness of Tony Stark. I mean, that is comic accurate. In one run of her series, while the real Tony isn't around, Riri gets help from an advanced AI that has Tony's personality. It's a really fun dynamic. If the MCU followed this route, I'm sure everyone would be thrilled. I mean, it allows Robert Downey Jr. to come back in some capacity without necessarily undoing or undercutting his character's sacrifice in Endgame.
Sounds like a deal.
It also allows the MCU to develop that classic comic relationship between Riri and Tony. It's a mentor/mentee relationship that was sort of applied to Tony Stark and Peter Parker in the MCU, and now that Tony is gone, the question becomes if Riri will have any Tony Stark influence in her life. But the idea of Tony Stark coming back as Riri's AI does cause a few problems. For one, RDJ is such an overpowering presence and a charisma magnet that he would always be the talking point.
How about that?
And really, if this is Riri's show and we're building toward a Riri-focused MCU future, then we should allow her that opportunity to grow on her own. Plus, just because Riri and Tony have a connection in the comics doesn't necessarily mean they should have one in the MCU.
No hard feelings, Point Break. You got a mean swing.
Especially since, as already mentioned, we saw Tony and Peter already explore that Iron Man mentors a young hero arc. So that leaves the door open for another AI, one with a way more personal connection to Riri. Natalie Washington was Riri's best friend, and what happened to her was tragic. I still wonder how much of Riri's backstory will be kept the same in the MCU, but in the comics, Riri loses her stepdad and Natalie when one day while out at a picnic, a drive-by shooting leaves both of them deceased. From that pain came the desire to be a hero to help people, and Ironheart was born. Eventually, when Riri designs her suit, her AI takes the form of Natalie, and that's a really interesting idea that I sort of like more than Tony Stark. Yes, I love Tony Stark, but I think it's just better for Riri's character to have an AI that's directly linked to her personal story rather than just a fan-fulfilling character beat. And maybe there's a way for the MCU to have its cake and eat it too. It would be nice for Riri to have a mentor, but also it would be better character-wise to have a different AI to make it more personal. So what does that mean? Well, maybe it's time for War Machine to shine a bit more. We all love Rhodey, but it's safe to say that he's never truly been a main character because he's mostly been in Tony Stark's big shadow. But the future is definitely looking bright. We know his Armor Wars TV series turned into a movie, and that will position Rhodey as an important player going forward. What if Rhodey also mentored Riri? Rhodey's been around the block a few times, and because he's such a military man who's been involved in almost all of the Avengers' main conflicts, he knows how this whole thing works. And it again creates an interesting character dynamic. Riri's life was uprooted by gun violence, and now she has to work with someone whose very existence is all about tremendous firepower. How would that work? I'm not sure, but I want to find out. Plus, it would be a beneficial relationship for the both of them because it gives Rhodey a chance to bond with someone who can give him suit upgrades. Because that's been my question for a while now. Rhodey is War Machine and has his War Machine armor, but Tony was building all his upgrades, right?
Okay, what?
Now that Tony is gone, what happens when Rhodey's suit breaks? And that's where Riri could come in. And in terms of suit upgrades, maybe this gives Riri's suit the chance to become more like War Machine than Iron Man. I think there's a case to be made that Ironheart's suits run the risk of being too similar to Iron Man's suits, and that creates a small problem in terms of growth. But if Ironheart becomes like a War Machine extension instead, hooked up with all this cool War Machine-esque firepower, then I think the results would be fascinating. I think an important element of an iron suit is how it attaches itself to its user. Back in the early days, and when I say early, I mean almost 15 years ago, which isn't necessarily that early, but feels like a lifetime at this point.
Anybody remember when I carried a nuke through a wormhole?
No, it's never come up.
Save New York?
Never heard that.
Recall that?
Anyways, back in the ancient times of the late 2000s, Tony's first suit was one you had to hop into. Then, as time went on, things got more and more advanced where eventually it became a nanotech extravaganza that he carried around with him everywhere in his own arc reactor, and would form around him instantly with just a thought. Given all the fancy suits in the MCU, I can see Ironheart doing something different than this at this point. In the comics, Riri has her suit tech all contained within a specialty bracer, so when she's out and about, she could have the suit form around her. This seems like the most logical suit upgrade that Riri will implement going forward. It's clean, it's slick, and it definitely makes crime fighting much easier. Okay, for the next few entries, I'm going to do something sort of fun. Yes, there are a good amount of normal weapons upgrades for the Ironheart suits that I'll get to, but really I want to talk about different suit variations that Ironheart could go through that would really give her suit an edge. Maybe with Ironheart, we could see some of those classic Iron Man suit variations and upgrades that we never saw in the MCU, but with Riri Williams instead. By doing that, you could continue on the legacy of Iron Man and still have an Iron Man-esque influence to Riri, even though her MCU backstory won't have them be mentor and mentee. I think that's a great way to be faithful to the comics while adapting to the MCU's story. Plus, it allows us to see some great iron suits. So the first one I want to talk about is the Ice Age Iron Man armor. In the comics, Mephisto sends Tony hurtling back in time to the Ice Age with limited technology at his disposal. Tony was able to make a pared down suit in order to survive. I think this is really interesting because rumors have been swirling that Mephisto is in the upcoming Ironheart series. Yes, I know, we've been burned before with Mephisto, and it should be taken with a huge, ginormous, Hulk-sized grain of salt. But if it's true, maybe we could have some version of this storyline. We know right now that Riri is already incredibly smart, but what if her series sees Mephisto send her back in time to somewhere desolate, and she has to use her limited resources to make a new Ice Age-esque suit? Look, I think we all fell in love with Iron Man partly because he was able to make a suit of armor out of nothing, and I want to see Riri undergo something similar. Alright, next armor entry is a bit of a curveball. Yes, Riri's suits should be inspired by Iron Man, but they should also stand on their own and differentiate themselves a bit, which I know is a really hard task. But you could have Riri have her version of Tony's stealth armor. In the comics, Tony had this armor to go on stealth missions, but the MCU's Tony was never one to sneak around. I mean, he blasted AC/DC when he made his first entrance to Loki in the Avengers movie, which should tell you everything Tony feels about sneaking around. Riri could have a stealth upgrade that makes her more adept at sneaking around without being discovered. This would technically fall in line with her character in the MCU, as she's been used to building her suit in secret and avoiding authorities. Yeah, stealth is good, right? Well, so's the opposite. Giant, loud, destructive armor to smash things is also very enjoyable to watch. I mean, yes, as this list has stated, I love character dynamics and satisfying character arcs, but I'm also flesh and blood. Sometimes I just want to see a giant suit of armor destroy a giant monster. So yes, Riri's suit upgrade should include the Fang Foombuster armor. Fang Foom is one of Tony's oldest villains, but things never worked out to see Tony fight an alien dragon. So let's maybe have Riri fight him instead? In the comics, Tony created a giant building-sized suit of armor to fight Fang Foom, and I definitely would not be mad if the MCU found a way to make that happen with Riri. Now that we're going to have a whole series with Ironheart in Phase 5, I think it's an opportunity to really dive into suit mechanics and offer you and I a breakdown of how exactly the suit tech works. In the MCU, Tony spent the whole first movie inventing and tinkering with the suit, but then with every following appearance, he invented his next big suit upgrade practically off screen. This was especially true with the nanotech that he implemented in Infinity War and Endgame. I'm overall fine with nanotech in the MCU, but it's becoming dangerously close to magic, as it's just a way to hand wave any sort of attempt at a legitimate technical explanation. With Riri though, they could dive into the dangers, the pratfalls, the benefits of nanotech in ways we haven't seen before, and could even give us new storylines with both Extremis armor and Bleeding Edge armor, which is something the MCU never really had time to explore outside of its inclusion in Iron Man 3. The rumor that will forever live rent-free in my head is how, before Iron Man 3 came out, there was talk about how the post-credit scene would see Tony develop a deep space armor and fly out to meet the Guardians of the Galaxy. I was a young, impressionable, disembodied CBR voice at the time, so I thought that made total sense. But you guys, you'll never believe it. The internet lied to me. Shocking, right? Anyways, although there's a comic storyline of Tony having deep space armor and joining the Guardians for a bit, that never really came to fruition. But again, that's something that Riri could totally do. I want to see Riri do different things and be a big player on both Earth and in the overall cosmos, and that would mean a deep space armor is totally a necessity. It would put her in a new environment and also force her to develop her skills in a way that truly challenges her. We know she could easily build any type of Earthbound suit now, but what happens when she's put on a whole different planet and has to build a spacesuit? That's what I want to find out. Tony Stark's Godbuster Armor is the most powerful suit of armor in existence. It literally can do anything. In the comics, Tony got caught in a virtual reality that allowed him to access every part of his brain, and it led to the Godbuster Armor. Once he was freed from the virtual reality called Escape, Tony destroyed the suit, knowing that it was just too powerful and too dangerous to be kept around. And we never got that storyline in the MCU, but again, now this is something Riri could go through. And it makes more sense in terms of Riri's character. She's part of the younger generation, and virtual reality is only getting more prevalent in today's society. It's only a matter of time before it's something that the MCU really crafts a whole movie around. Having Riri trapped in virtual reality and creating the most powerful suit in existence would be an upgrade for the ages. Now that I've gotten through some fun suit upgrades that would make great series or movie plot lines, I want to spend the last few entries just talking about some specialty Ironheart weapons. The last few entries were all Iron Man suits and plot lines that Riri should adapt, but we need to get into the nit and gritty of how Ironheart's suit should function and what she needs now that she's a full-on hero. In the MCU, after getting to play with the Wakanda-ized Ironheart suit, she's going to come back with a whole series of new ideas to install herself. Ironheart's suit is usually equipped with an assortment of M.I.P.s, which are micro-impact precision missiles. Now, this is something we've seen in Iron Man's suit, but it would be fascinating to see how these could evolve on Riri's suit over time. But as cool as missiles are, any iron suit is more known for its propulsor beams, and I think Riri should have the most powerful one of all. In comics, both Iron Man and Ironheart have that explosive propulsor tech that stuns a lot of enemies. But the Omnibeam is like an ultra attack. It just disintegrates anything in its path with over 25,000 degrees Fahrenheit of heat and can cause people to go blind. It also acts as an ultrasonic beam attack, which is pretty cool. Tony used this weapon in the comics, and I think it's something Riri should build toward. It's an energy attack that absorbs the energy around its user and just unleashes something devastatingly powerful. Scary. Offensive weapons are visually stunning and a lot of fun, but it's always important to highlight defense as well. I never really saw Iron Man focus so much on defense. He was more of a let's get knocked around a bunch type of fighter. But in today's age, you have to be smarter than that. I think Riri has the capacity to invent energy shields that create a protective barrier around her suit so that it doesn't take too much damage. It could be like a hybrid that in a way incorporates Black Panther's kinetic energy absorption ability with something new. Plus, energy shields I think look cool. Ironheart's suit should have holographic projectors in it. The ability to create copies of yourself to fool and disorient your enemies is a very specific fighting style that highlights the idea of being smarter than your opponent. Sure, having the most powerful blaster around is very attack-oriented, but I really like the idea of Riri being a fighter who's also trying to use all the tools in her toolbox to fight her enemies. She could totally invent holographic projectors with her tech skills and use those to her advantage. It also highlights the idea of Riri inventing new weapons and gadgets to assist her in fighting crime, which I definitely want to see. Holographic tech looks scarily real in the MCU as is, so let's see what Riri can create with it. Okay, my last one's just a quick one that doesn't serve a huge offensive or defensive function, but should still be an upgrade. I hope Riri creates her transparent visor like she does in the comics. It allows her to keep her helmet on while we can still see her face, which is something Tony never quite managed to perfect. He always had to take his helmet away to really talk to people, but this allows us to see Riri's expressions without leaving her head exposed. It's a tiny detail, but one that would make me quite happy. Do you guys think Ironheart's suit will be better than Iron Man's? I think with the way suit tech is advancing, we're gonna get some amazing upgrades in Phase 5 to Riri's suit. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching CBR.